Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Brian Smith. He's the founder of UGG, a passionate innovator, an author, and keynote speaker. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I was just telling you, I just kind of read your book cover to cover. I finished it a couple of days ago, just in time for this. And you know, like, it was one of the few books that I've read that truly talks about the good and bad of being an entrepreneur, and kind of the struggle and how hard it is and how time consuming it is. And so, but before we kind of get into kind of the book and kind of, you know, starting UGG from nothing to something, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with kind of where you grew up.
Sure. I grew up in Australia, a city called Canberra, and you know, just had a pretty normal childhood and ended up becoming an accountant out of high school. And instead of going to college, I decided to become a chartered accountant, and which is like a CPA in the US, and ended up just hating it. but I never quit on things, and so I struggled through for 10 years until I graduated. And when I graduated, that's the day I quit. And and I'd always had this sort of desire to do something for myself. You know, I'd seen a lot of my friends who started their own businesses, and I certainly didn't want to just work in an accounting office and become a partner or something. So I was just hunting around for, you know, what to do, and it suddenly struck me, well, damn, all of the biggest trends in Australia have come from California. So I just decided, damn, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to find the next big thing, and I'm going to bring it back home. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, and so within a couple of weeks, I booked a ticket and I went across to Los Angeles with my surfboard and my suitcase and set up in Santa Monica there, and took, you know, a month of surfing in Malibu, and, you know, no big idea, and another month of surfing Malibu, no big idea. And then it was in the third month, I was, you know, flicking through this surf magazine, and I saw an advertisement for sheepskin boots, and I went, oh my God, there are no sheepskin boots in America. And at the time, 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear, you know. So I just thought, instant millionaire, you know. So yeah, we've all been through that.
Sure.
I called up the factory in Australia who'd run this ad and arranged to be the distributor, and bought some samples in, thinking that I was going to be like the next richest person on the planet, you know. So that's how simple the start of UGG was. It wasn't any great rocket science. It was strictly me, you know, sort of like Christopher Columbus bringing tobacco back because it was not here, you know. And I brought sheepskin boots to America because they weren't here. It was pretty simple.
Sure. So obviously, pretty much everybody at this point, globally, or at least in most countries, have heard of, probably own a pair of boots, or, you know somebody that does, right? But I'm kind of curious to dive a bit deeper into kind of the journey. You wrote a book called The Birth of a Brand about kind of that journey. So can you walk kind of me and the audience through kind of the early days and kind of the struggles of that stuff? Because I think the one thing that I really enjoyed about the book is, obviously everybody kind of knows the outcome, but you were brutally honest about, you know, kind of how hard it can be, or like cash flow issues, or having a seasonal product, or that kind of thing. So I'm curious to know, walk kind of me and the listener through that kind of journey that you took, especially kind of maybe starting with the early
Yeah,
days of
okay.
actually, getting
Yeah,
these
the early
things.
days is the best place to start that because, thinking I was going to be such a hit, I started going to the shoe stores and got shut out. They didn't even understand. They're going, sheepskin in California? You crazy, you know? And
Sure.
so I realized, though, that all the surfers who had been to Australia knew about them. So I started selling into the surf shops and the surf market as our first adopters. And
Sure.
when I had the samples, I went to all the shops and they go, "Oh my God, fantastic! You're going to make a fortune!" So I was so elated that I bought 500 pairs. I arranged for a small investor to come in and bought 500 pairs from Australia, and they arrived. And so I went back to all the surf shops and they would go, "Oh my God, you're going to be great!" But we couldn't sell them out of our store. We just sell surfboards and trunks and sandals. You should go to the shoe stores. And so after this huge, feeling that I was going to be hugely successful, the first season sales was 28 pairs into the surf shops.
Sure.
And, that happened to be exactly $1,000. And that was so disappointing. I mean, I was just staggered that I had another 480 pairs left in my warehouse, and my warehouse was my third bedroom. But the funny thing is, after looking back years later, and the reason I wrote the book is the theme that I've discovered, that you can't give birth to adults. Every single business that's listed on the Wall Street Journal Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange page, every single one of those companies had to start out with $1,000 or somewhere around it. And the theme of the book is that every product or service or movement is conceived and then an action is taken, and that's the birth. So for the birth of UGG, it was buying in those samples. And then every business or movement just goes into this infancy, and it just lies there and lies there and lies there, and there's no amount of feeding it or urging it. This infant can't get up and go to college. It has to be an infant. Now, in entrepreneurial terms, that's where most entrepreneurs give up. They've had their aha idea. They've worked like crazy to bring it to market, and then it just sits there, and they think they've failed because it doesn't seem to be doing anything. And if you can hang in through that infancy, it'll start toddling, and that's when the first adopters are picking up your product and you're getting articles written about it. And that'll pretty quickly go into the youth, where you've got consistent orders and consistent production, and the accounting and billing is working, the sales force is great, the warehouse is perfect. That is the best phase for every business, and you can stay up to a $20 million business in that phase. But if it's a really, really good product or service like UGG was, it'll hit the teenage years, and it'll want to be everywhere at once. Just remember when we were teenagers, you want to be at every party in town.
Sure.
Well, you want to be at every trade show. You want to be on every retail shelf, and it's super, super dangerous because you just don't have the financial capacity to handle it or the maturity to handle it. And so it's super dangerous phase, but eventually it'll mature, and the accountants put all the controls in, and it becomes a sort of a steady old business. So that was what I got from the selling 28 pairs, is that I got a really good hard wake up call on just how difficult a business can be, and what can happen if you don't give up.
Sure. Well, and I think the thing too that I really took from the book was you basically were selling and constantly selling and driving, at least in the early years, up and down kind of California, going to all these places and shops, and then eventually you kind of expanded east and you started flying around to different places and trying to sell and doing the trade shows kind of across North America and whatnot. But I think the thing that I think a lot of people maybe don't realize is you did that for years and pretty much the entire time before you sold UGG.
Yeah. I was like, the prophet in the wilderness preaching the wisdom of sheepskin boots. and the
Sure.
first 3 years I was, doing summer jobs all year because it certainly didn't sustain me. I was washing boats in Marina del Rey, and I was construction up in Bel Air, Los Angeles. And the third year I was a greenskeeper on a golf course, just to keep paying the bills. And many times I wanted to give up the UGG business because it just didn't seem to be working. It was such a slow adoption. But when the big breakthrough came when I'd been running these ads in Surfer Magazine and Action Sports Retailer Magazine of these models on the beach, and it was getting nowhere. And I was trying to explain this to a buddy of mine who owned a surf shop, and he just said, "Oh, shut up, Brian." And he called all these little kids out from the back room and says, "Hey, you guys, what do you think of UGG boots?" And they all just went, "Oh, those UGGs, man, they're so fake. If you've seen the ads, those models, they can't surf." And I instantly realized I'm sending the wrong message to my target market. And so I instantly pivoted like every entrepreneur has to. And I started using these young pro surfers, these kids who had just turned pro, so they were really cheap, And I photographed them on just going surfing. There's a spot called Trestles up in San Onofre and Black's Beach here in La Jolla. Okay. And these are iconic walks. I mean, if you ever surf there, you know that the walks are miles to get to the beach. And I photographed these things and ran the ads in Surfer Magazine the next year. The sales went to 200,000 just like instantly. And I realized then the power of putting the reader into the advertisement, that you had to make it so enticing that the reader wanted to be in the ad. And every little kid would die to be walking to Trestles or Black's Beach with Mike Parsons or Ted Robinson, these young surfers. And that when I realized that sort of opened my eyes, and I ended up falling passionately in love with marketing. And I duplicated that into skiing and snowboarding. And then, as we were growing, I was trying to get back east, and they would go, "Oh, no, we have mud and slush, and they'll never work over here." And so I had to figure out, well, what do the kids do in the winter? And it hit me, eventually they all play hockey. And that meant they have to change shoes at the hockey rink, and their moms come and watch. So the moms are sitting in a 40-degree room, freezing. So it just was a matter of hanging in there. And that process I just described took like 6 years to do. And and I was always, even when I started off myself on the road, but then as we got sales reps, I would start traveling with them. And in the 15 or 16 years that I was doing a lot of traveling, I racked up over 2 million frequent flyer miles on American Airlines, just traveling with the sales reps all over the country and all different parts of the country. So it was very much a hands-on thing, and I just had so much passion for the brand and the product itself that it was a job, but it was fun. I never looked at it as work.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting is how you had to convince people to basically try the shoes on or the boots on without socks.
That's great.
Walk the listener through that.
Yeah, well, when you look at the product, let's say you're a guy in Minnesota, okay? And, we wear Sorels, and they're rubber, and they're warm, and, we take them off when we get to the door, and every time we go outside, that's the boot for us. Yeah. So you got this mindset, right? Now you match that up on. Let's say you go to the retail shop and you see a Sorel sitting next to an UGG boot. It's not even a comparison, The UGG in their minds, the UGG was so delicate and soft, and you can't get it wet, you can't get it dirty, and it's hot and smelly and prickly. So that's the American consumer's view of sheepskin. But in Australia, we know that it's rugged. I mean, you cannot rip a piece of sheepskin. It is so tough. And it is insulating, so you can be in 100, or minus 20 degrees with no socks on, and your feet stay foot temperature. But you can be in 100 degrees temperature, and your foot still stays at foot temperature because there's such an amount of wicking through all the fibers, and you can
Sure.
get it wet, and it's the only material that will retain its warmth when it's wet. So you can be sitting in a pair of slopping wet sheepskin boots, and your feet will stay warm. So it's all these amazing characteristics that Americans didn't know. And finally, in frustration, when I'd be at a trade show and some woman would come back from Chicago, and I'd say, hey, these are perfect for Chicago. Oh, no, we have mud and slush. And I'd say, come here, take your sock off, put this on. And I would hear, oh, my God. And I heard that saying thousands and thousands and thousands of times while I was building the business, because when they put them on with bare feet, they are so sensual and just inviting that they would just buy boots on the spot for their stores. And so it was really, really critical in those early days to get people to try them on. After a while, when it became a fashion item and Hollywood took off, nobody cared anymore. It was all about the look. But back in those early days, man, it was a battle trying to get people to buy. Because of that misperception of how bad sheepskin or how hot sheepskin is.
Sure. No, totally. The other thing too that you had to deal with throughout kind of the whole kind of birth and kind of even coming into kind of the mainstream was you had a lot of kind of competitors and knockoff brands, and you guys always seemed to kind of stay ahead of them, with color and style and but kind of walk the listener through kind of how you dealt with that, because I think a lot of people keep going.
That was a deliberate thing on our part. We after a couple of years, we started to get other Australian companies bringing product in, and I'd registered the UGG trademark by now, and we were protecting that pretty strongly. But there were still other boots coming in, and when we realized as we started growing, especially when we hit that 200,000 year, that's when a whole bunch of others jumped in thinking it was easy money. We realized because you can't patent the design of a shoe or, especially a sheepskin shoe. And so we realized that the only way to win was to get out front and then run faster. Okay.
Sure. But I think
what that meant was that we'd introduce all of our products at a trade show, right? And that's usually in February, March, April. And then so you'd come to the shipping season in September, October, November, and all the other people would not have had time to copy those. So we'd have a free season to with all of our new product out there. But at the next trade show, all of these knockoffs would have come in copying what we did last year. So we had to have new product. And so every season, we were always one season ahead of them all. And that was the genius of the marketing, or the product development, was that, what we had on show right now was just for now. We were already planning next season's product in the back room, so that's what I mean by get out front first and run faster. It's the only way to survive.
Sure. So walk us through kind of the struggle of being a seasonal product and trying to generate enough sales in a short, kind of window of time to kind of survive till the next year, to kind of reorder. And because part of the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, and I would put myself in that, is you have to have obviously like orders, and then you have to have inventory to supply those orders, but you also need to have money and capital laying around to actually like place some of those orders, right? And you might not have the actual orders to fill.
You're right. Now in hindsight, it's pretty damn obvious, but as an entrepreneur going into it, I was an accountant, like I said, and I knew profit and loss, and I knew if I
Sure.
doubled the sales, and I'd have double the profit, and that doesn't work in business because you're absolutely right. Even though I was an accountant, I had almost no knowledge of finance, and
Okay, interesting.
and this is back before all these new computer spreadsheets where you put all your forecasts in and it spits out a cash flow statement. So I was ignorant about that, and so we'd be, let's say we just did $1 million and we're broke, right? It's the trade show season coming up in February, March, April. I've spent all the profits from the previous winter on new samples and booking the trade shows and bringing all the sales reps in, and was broke again in February, March. So how the hell am I going to survive till next September? Let alone where am I going to find the money to bring the boots in? So what I really, really wish I had have known at that time was doubling sales doubles your headaches. It does not double your profit. Because now, let's say you go from 1 million to 2 million, now you've got to find the money to bring in enough product to satisfy 2 million in sales. There's $1 million right there. And then you've got all your overheads because now you've got more staff and more shipping and more, bigger warehouse to handle it. All your expenses go up. And so looking back now, the one thing I really wish I had have known about in the business was finance. But, you probably recall from my book that one of the key ingredients in being an entrepreneur is a certain level of ignorance. Because if I had have known all of the problems the seasonality would have caused and all of the problems, having expensive inventory and just because we're in shoes, we never know what size foot's coming through the door, right? So to sell a pair of 9s, we have to be prepared with size 5 through 12. So there's 10 units just to sell one. That's a horrific problem.
Right.
And if I had have known that, I probably wouldn't have started. And if I had have known that I had to, pay my product up front and then bring it in and then give it out to these retailers who didn't pay for 30 or 60 days, I would never have started again. So the beauty of it, every entrepreneur needs a certain level of ignorance or nothing to get done.
Sure. No, I think that's really great. And you also kind of brought on a bunch of different kind of partners and people to finance, and you kind of started different kind of brands to fund this and stuff. Walk me through kind of the journey of just kind of bringing on people and kind of almost a little bit of right place, right time, or a bit of luck, or I don't know, because it seemed like sometimes you almost quit and then you'd get a phone call and you'd be back in business, kind of thing. So walk me through that kind of journey.
Well, the financings were not well thought through, again, because I said I didn't understand it. And they were more acts of necessity. Like I'd be finishing up a trade show in March and I'd go, oh my God, I've just written 800,000 in sales. I don't have that money to buy product. And so I would start April, May, June, July, August trying to find an investor. And even after 5 or 6 years, or even after 8 years, the banks were just telling me, oh, Brian, Uggs, they're such a fad. They won't be around next year. We're not going to bankroll that. And so no investor was willing to step up to the plate. And so I was always relying on, just these random people I would meet who were interested. But I never had a financial plan set in place. So I was always at the, I'd usually have to buy out the previous investor because he didn't have the capacity to take it to the next level. So to get the next investor in, they didn't want the old investor in, so I'd have to buy the old one out. And then it was just like this series of financings that were not good financings They were adequate for the time, but they weren't put together with any sense of foresight, and
Right.
so there was this one time that I'd sold these three guys to come in and bankroll the company, and I'd bought the old person out, and we were going to share the company 25% each. But there was this little proviso that I didn't get my 25% of stock actually issued until I finished up a trademark lawsuit that I was involved in, and I didn't care because I knew I'd win that, and I was also the sales rep, so for the company. So, we moved all the warehouse up to Anaheim where these new investors were, and I was out on the road, the very, very next day, and one of my customers goes, "Hey, Brian, I heard you sold the business." And I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I called an order in. They said you don't own it anymore." And I said, "What? You're kidding me?" And I called up the office later and said, "What the hell are you telling people?" He said, "Well, you don't, you're not an owner." I said, "Yes, I am. You're my three new partners." And they go, "Well, no, technically you don't have any stock until you finish that." And wow, I went into this huge depression. And
Sure.
And I ended up for 3 days pretty much moping about, not knowing what to do. And eventually I meditated a bit and said, "Okay, well, what am I going to do?" And the bottom line was I decided I really love selling, now. And so I went back up and said, "Okay, I may not own the company, but I'm going to make sure I get a pair of UGG boots on everybody's foot in America." And so I started out being a sales rep, and after the first month, I got back to the office, and Neil, one of the guys, hands me a check for $5,000. Says, "That's your commissions." And I went, "Are you kidding me? I've never earned any money. This is the first money I've pulled out of the business ever." And the next month I came back, there's another check for 10 grand, and the next month another check for 10 grand. And I realized, that, oh my God, I'm out there having a ball with all my retailers. I'm not doing any purchasing or shipping or accounting, and I just love what I'm doing. And, it turned out to, that one of the sayings in my book is sometimes your greatest disappointments become your greatest blessing. And I look back at how disappointed I was to realize that I wasn't an owner, and yet how much fun I was having by not being an owner, still in the same business. But let's fast forward a few years. I spent the next 2 or 3 years on the road just making a ton of money, 120, 140,000 a year or per season, and just having golfing and surfing with all my customers. It was a brilliant life, and not doing any of the work. And then in the meantime, Neil had brought the other two guys out, so he owned all 100% of it. And he said, "Come on, Brian, we're going to issue your stock for, And so finally I was going to get my 25% back. And the week before we arranged to do it, he had this huge heart attack and died. So
that was kind of shocking to me.
So
I was like, I didn't see that coming.
Here I was, like on top of heaven, and suddenly the whole earth kicked out from under me again. So I spent this nightmare 9 months. Like, his widow had never set foot in the warehouse, so she had no idea what was going on. And so I had to step back in and become a forensic accountant and try and figure out where everything was. And the bottom line, during that season, my manufacturer didn't think I was going to be able to pull it off and save the business. So he didn't tell me, but he found another distributor to start selling his product, and didn't realize he wasn't going to ship me. And he didn't tell me he wasn't, because he thought maybe I would be able to get some financing. And so come July, August, I'm realizing he's not giving me any help at all. I better look for another manufacturer. So I went down to Australia and tried to find this big tannery was really interested at first, but they would never commit. So I, came back to California. It's now August, September. We're getting, we should be shipping, and I still haven't got the production going. And yet I've got like $3 million worth of orders. It was the most insane thing. That whole year while I was trying to save the business, the sales were going fantastic out on the road with the reps, but I couldn't get the money to finance. So anyway, the bottom line is that this big trade show came up, and I decided to go anyway. Even, this is one of those entrepreneurial things. You're never defeated until the moment you give up, right? And so I wasn't ready to admit defeat yet, even though I had no idea how I was going to do it. So we went to the trade show, and when I got there, I looked across and at this competitor's booth on the other side of the convention center, and there was all of my product with different labels, and it was a company that my supplier had teamed up with, and that was the first time I actually knew that my supplier had abandoned me. And so we finished the show, and I realized we're going to have to go out of business, and I called my wife and told her that, next Monday we'll start calling everybody and tell them to buy this other product. And the last call I made was back to the tannery in Australia, the guy I'd been negotiating with, and I said, "Hey, Gordon, I'm sorry, for all the time I took out of your life, but we're going to have to shut it down. This is what my supplier's done." And we hung up, and then like at 2:00 in the morning, he calls back and says, "Brian, screw that guy. I'll get you all the product you need," and like without a handshake or without a contract or anything, we went into business, and he started sending product to me. And it got to be like 5,000 pairs a week, and as soon as they hit our warehouse, all the retailers were so scarce that they would drive down and pick up their product rather than wait for UPS to deliver it, and so we ended up salvaging. We stayed alive that season. We threw away over $1 million worth of wholesale orders because we didn't get enough
Wow.
product in. But the thing is, we were alive, and then on top of that, when Neil had died, right before he died, when I was going to be coming into the company, we got life insurance policies on each other, and and after all that time, we salvaged the season, and the life insurance policy paid out, and it was just enough money to buy the company back 100% from his widow. So Here I was, out of business 1 month, like in September, and by November I own 100% of the company again. It was just like insane.
Wild,
yeah,
right?
I mean, and that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur, and that's why I love the chaos of entrepreneurialism. Is that you never know what's coming around the corner, and that was just a fantastic example.
No, totally. So just to be clear, how many years had you been in business at, to the story you just kind of mentioned, where you literally called Gordon and were like, "I'm done, dude. Like, I can't do this." Like, how many years were you in?
That was about 7 years, and
Yeah.
And we were up to about 3 million in sales, when that transaction happened. So it wasn't a small business. It was one of those situations where you're too big to be small and you're too small to be big. You're in no man's land, You can't afford a full-time staff, but you desperately need one. It's one of those crazy situations. But that was another case of, your most disappointing disappointments become your greatest blessings. I look back now and think, how lucky was I that, the situation transpired that way, where I'd own the company again.
Sure. No, that's amazing. So kind of walk me through kind of how you kind of the next few years and kind of you finally deciding to sell the company.
Yeah, well, the sales grew, 3, 5, 7, 9 million. And when we got up around 10 million, this is now, let's say 13 or 14 years into the business. Yeah, about that. And I decided that I wanted, we were really big in surfing. We were really big in skiing. We were huge in snowboarding. We were big in ice hockey back east. But there were all these fragmented markets. And I wanted to try and build the brand into a single statement. So I came up with the idea of casual comfort. And this was going to launch beyond all those little niche surfing type things. And I knew the only way to launch this was to do a really, really slick public relations campaign. So I hired a group out of Boston, and again, we were doing about 10, 12 million at this time. And I put together this huge press kit and, a dog and pony show in booklets and samples and everything. And we said, okay, my goal was to be on the front page of the lifestyle section of USA Today magazine, right? Because that's so influential.
Okay.
So we started off in Boston and New York and Philadelphia, and we worked our way all the way across to Chicago, which was the buying office of the fashion editor office of USA Today, and we got there, and I had an appointment for 3:00, and we got there at 5 to 3 and announced ourselves. And Margaret comes, she was a fashion editor, comes running out and says, "Oh, Brian, I'm so sorry, I've double booked. I have to be on a conference call at 3. I've got 5 minutes." And my presentation was like 45 minutes, so I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it. So I just instinctively. And this, again, is an entrepreneur. You have to learn to pivot. Or most entrepreneurs, it's instinctive. You just pivot. I thought, what can I do? And so I instinctively reached down into my briefcase, and I had this tatty old folder which I always carried, and it had all of these celebrity photos in it from, that I'd collected over the years. And I said, well, this is who's wearing the product. There's Tom Petty and Neil Young and Sting and Patrick Swayze and all these Hollywood people, Brooke Shields, and then I got to this one photo which was Pamela Anderson in a red swimsuit on the set of Baywatch, wearing these tall Uggs.
Sure.
And I quickly flicked by that because nobody wears boots like that. And Margaret goes, go back, who is that? And she goes, oh my God. And she took the name of the tabloid magazine because it was from a London newspaper, and the name of the photographer. She said, do you have a press kit? And I said, yep. She says, great, got to go. And that whole thing took less than 4 minutes, right?
Sure.
So I totally knew we blew it. And the next day I was in the airport in Chicago heading back to San Diego, and I bought a coffee in USA Today, and I got to the lifestyle section, and there's this full page, front page, and all the second page was this incredible expose on sheepskin boots and the shearling footwear category and how big, and it was just this amazing story about how the brand had been around, the UGG brand had been around, and what really bummed me out was she listed all these competitors that she could find, and I hated seeing that. But anyway, when I got back to California, I drove up to the office, and I found out that the phones had been out of control all day with retailers wanting to know how to stock the product and consumers wanting to know where and how they could buy the product, So it was the most unbelievably successful campaign, and that was when we started to get the national coverage. Two things happened. One is that all the big department store buyers that I'd been trying to get into, who wouldn't even look at UGG because we were such a weird little shoe, suddenly they see this thing in USA Today and they go, oh my God, it's a category, it's shearling. We've got to be in it, And so then they start researching who's the best one in the shearling category, and it's always UGG, So it launched us into the department store world. But the other thing it did was, we'd been seeding all these Hollywood stylists and the hairdressers and the makeup artists and the wardrobe people, and we'd be sending them free boots for a while. And when they saw all this stuff hit in USA Today, they started really bringing it out. And every time they'd be doing some movie star's hair, they'd be going, well, what are you wearing? Oh, these are UGG boots, man. They're so fabulous. And, well, can you get me some? And so this whole Hollywood thing started to take off. And before you knew it, it's in, when you look at Us Magazine or People Magazine, you see all the stars on the streets caught wearing UGG boots, and it became this amazing fashion item. And so that was, that was huge in taking the product from being this little niche sporting goods type thing into a whole fashion industry.
Sure. And then walk me through kind of selling to Deckers and kind of how that came to be, because it was kind of interesting how you ran into the founder.
Yeah. Well, it got to be about 15. We'd done about 15 million in sales, and we finished up, one or two trade shows, and the sales reps were sending orders in already for next season. And it looked like we were going to have a $20 million season the next year. And this is in like February, March. And I immediately knew, oh my God, I only just survived last year. How the hell can I find another $3 or $4 million capital for product? And I knew I was just getting so big that I couldn't find people to take the risk. And so I was dreading the success we had, which is an unusual thing for an entrepreneur to say, but I was dreading how successful we'd become because of these financial problems. And it was still seasonal. So venture capitalists hated it. Banks hated it because they didn't want to throw out all this money and then have to sit around all summer and hope they get repaid, So sure. I was at the airport in Atlanta in the baggage claim section, and I looked way down the other end of the thing, and I saw a buddy of mine. His name was Doug Otto, and I'd known him since, because he started his company, Deckers, with these triple-decker sandals. They were, really high neoprene, like high-heeled thongs or flip-flops,
sure.
And he'd built that over the years into, by licensing different products into a pretty big business. And then he took the Teva sandal license, and that was so big and so popular when the outdoor market took off that he took his company public. And right. When I saw him in the airport, I knew, oh my God, Doug, he's sitting on $25-30 million, from his public offering. And
sure.
And I thought, oh my God, it's perfect. His business dies every winter, and our business dies every summer. And I thought it's so perfect. And because we'd known each other on the road, we were crisscrossing each other on the road for years and years and years. And we knew each other really well. And we used to joke about, hey, why don't you buy me out? You can't afford me. You can't afford me, all that sort of stuff. And so I walked up to him at the baggage claim. He saw me, and we high-fived, and I said, hey, Doug, if ever we're going to do it, now's the time. And we had the accountants talking to each other that afternoon. That's how fast it went. And
that's amazing.
So it was like weeks, just a couple of weeks. We actually signed the deal, and then it took about a year to process that into action. But and I kept running the business for that next year, and that was an exciting year because we this is a bit of a segue. I hope you don't mind, but
no.
We had been doing like I have this saying that luck is one thing, but I really believe in karma, And so we'd been
Okay.
shipping product to this woman in England for 5 or 6 years. It was a pain in the butt because she wanted 20 different pairs to go to 20 different people, which meant 20 different customs invoices, and it was a nightmare. But we did it because
Sure.
this lady was Trudy Styler, who's the wife of Sting, and
Sure.
and so because we wanted to be cool and be with her, we kept doing it, and then the karmic return was one day she called up and said, "Brian, oh my God, I've just been to a seminar. It's changed my world, and I want the most perfect pair of size whatever tall sand Ugg boots, and do you have a pen? Here's where to ship them." And I said, "Yep." She goes, "Oprah, care of Oprah Winfrey show, in Chicago." And so we sent these boots off, and then that over the next couple of years, I started working with the Deckers people, and they took it on, and they really capitalized on the Oprah connection, and we were, 2 years in a row, we were on Oprah's Best Picks for Christmas, which was 20 minutes of full-on nothing but Uggs for 20 minutes on the Oprah show, and you could not, no way we could have ever paid for that type of advertising, and that's what took it international. And so, even though I got out of it and I cashed out, which was fantastic because, I had reached my level of competence as an entrepreneur, and I hate being in big companies, and I knew a public company would cripple me or suffocate me. So it was, and also I didn't have the skill set to take it out to all these department stores. I was more of a boots on the ground guy. And so Deckers personnel took it on, and they took it up to be, it's been in the billions for the last 5-6 years now, and
that's great.
And so it was a perfect time for me to exit, and it was a perfect time for the brand. It was like handing off your daughter to the future husband, and then watching them grow and thrive. It was a fantastic, and so I still feel I'm still the founder, and you can never get fired as the founder. And Ugg always feels like my baby, and so the more success it has, the more proud I am. I have no attachment to it from a possessive, sense at all. It's just I just love how successful it's been.
Sure. No, I think that's great. And I this kind of is actually a great thing to kind of close the show with is you do kind of speaking and coaching now. And so walk me through kind of how you're helping and giving back to others kind of coming up through kind of the entrepreneur channel.
Sure. Well, on the coaching first, I do very specific coaching. In fact, I don't help entrepreneurs start out with a new idea and take it to market. But I do love helping people who are in the most difficult phase where they've been in business a few years, they're successful, and they're being crippled by their success, just like all those years that I was. And so, in fact, their biggest issue is they can't get the money for the manufacturing to handle the increase in sales that they have. Right? And that's a horrific problem for every entrepreneur. And so that's where I find I'm really good at identifying people. There's one girl that I'm helping, and she has a brand called Sash. It's a shoulder bag made out of this beautiful fine lamb leather. And when I first met her, I went, "Oh my God, she's in chapter 5 of my book. I've got to save her from chapters 7 through 10. And so they're the types of people I can help. And she's doing a phenomenal business. You can find that online. It's thesashbag.com, and she's doing a huge business on the internet right now. And I have a lot of fun with that business. So people like in that stage where they've been through the process, they know they've got a successful business, they just cannot finance the success. They're the ones that I feel that I have the best qualifications to help. And then as far as the speaking goes, I wrote that book about UGG, and it's like 100 more stories of what we've just talked about,
Totally.
And it's like all my philosophy comes out, like, the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is live every day happily as a tadpole, And so because of that book, I get to speak on, people just want me to come and speak. And so I use all those quotes, and the tadpole quote's one of the favorites. The people will come back to me a year later, and they won't remember much about what I talked about, but they remember the tadpole, because it's such phenomenal philosophy. And,
Totally.
you just got to stick in there and keep doing it. When I read the Nike book, about Phil Knight, he did it. When I remember Reebok did it when I was, building my brand. They were building their brand. You just got to hang in there and do it. And so that's pretty much the message I talk about from the stage. And I love speaking to entrepreneurial groups or businesses that are up to 5 to 10 million. And I never have a single graph or a chart or anything on my PowerPoints. I am not that type of speaker. I tell stories, and I talk about philosophical issues and how to run a business and what to expect as an entrepreneur. It is not how to improve your bottom line or how to be a better leader. I mean, those books just, there's so many of them. I just glaze over. But the book has led to the speaking, and the speaking I love coming off. And I'll have people come up to me afterwards and say, oh my God, Brian, I was going to give up my business this week, but I just realized I'm still in the infancy stage, and I'm going to hang in there,
Sure.
And I'm
That's awesome.
I'm just about choking up telling you that, because it is so meaningful for me to know that I reach people in that manner.
Totally.
And
that's great.
So that's why I love the speaking, and it's not work; it's just pleasure. And as long as somebody is affected every time I come off the stage, I'm a happy guy.
Sure. So do you invest at all, or you're not in that at all?
A little bit, but
Okay.
I mostly invest in myself. I always have. Yeah, I've always envied people who had Apple stock and all this stuff. But I invested all my money in UGG, and that paid off in the millions. Much more than these other people who bought Apple stock. So really, I like investing in things that I know I control. So I'm not like an angel investor or a venture capitalist or anything. Although I do work with them all the time. I mean, whenever I see a client that I think could really use it, I make the introductions to the angels.
Got you. No, that's great. But Brian, sadly, we're coming to the end of the show, so let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and the book.
Thanks a lot. Okay, my website is briansmithspeaker.com. Although I am in a redo, which in about a month, that website will be uggfounder.com, uggfounder.com. And you can get me there, and you can find the book there online, or else you can just go to Amazon. But it's called The Birth of a Brand. And it's doing really, really well on Amazon. And as I said, it's just this... everybody who reads it says, "Oh my God, I can't believe how honest you are," and it was like it was totally like a page turner. And I think it's because they're not sure I'm going to be around next chapter.
Oh yeah, very much so. Like I said this kind of earlier, like before we kind of got started recording, it was like brutally honest, and not in a bad way. Like in the way that like you talked about how like. Even like early on when you first came to California, like the house you lived in burnt down, and you talked about kind of, the struggles of just like almost giving up a handful of times, right?
The time,
and like, it was like very, very real, where I think in some ways you're just like, oh, like somebody else that has a global brand went through the stuff that you're going through. And I think people find comfort in that, including myself, right?
Yeah.
Because working on a startup myself, and there's days that you're just like, man, I should just give this all
Isn't
up
that the
and
truth?
you know,
Yeah.
forget about it and do something else. But you know, and so I got a lot out of the book, and really kind of glad to have you on the show. Hopefully we can do this again, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show.
It's my pleasure, Kevin. I really had a good time. I think we had a good talk.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk
Sounds
soon.
good. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt. Bye. Thanks for listening. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.